The Indiana Pacers tasting postseason success for the first time in 10 years.
Complete the sweep. They win a playoff series for the first time in 20 years.
Upper prayer. That's it. The Timberwolves have knocked out the defending champion Denver Nuggets.
The NBA over recent years has been very diverse. There's really been no team that's stuck out amongst the crowd. Whether you like it or not, building a true super team that has not just one dominant season, but years of championships has been almost impossible. What if I told you that the Splash Brother Warriors were the last NBA dynasty that we'll see in the NBA for a long, long time? Would you believe me? Well, let's talk about it.
The dream season is now complete. The Golden State Warriors are the 2015 NBA champions.
To redemption has brought the Warriors back home. The Golden State Warriors are the 2017 NBA champions. The Golden State Warriors have won back-to-back NBA championships, and they have won 3 of the last 4 NBA titles.
The Golden State Warriors during the mid-2010s built the greatest dynasty of the modern NBA outside of the Jordan Bulls. With the overwhelming firepower of the Steph Curry, Klay Thompson, and Draymond Green Big Three, and Kevin Durant for the last 2 rings, it was a pretty sad time for almost everyone else in the league except the Warriors, because during this point in the league, there was legit nothing else any other team could do to beat this team in a 7-game series. Well, except one guy. This team, despite many other attempted super teams in the past, they built their team primarily through the NBA draft. They drafted Steph Curry in 2009 and developed him into one of the greatest players the game has ever seen. They drafted Klay Thompson in 2011 and turned him into the second greatest shooter the game has ever seen, only behind his teammate. They drafted Draymond Green in 2012 and turned him into one of the greatest defenders of all time, the facilitator for the best offensive team of all time, and overall a very well-rounded player. They made great moves to get valuable role players like Andre Iguodala, Andrew Bogut, Sean Livingston, and more. And when the reign of this team was in jeopardy to the Cleveland Cavaliers, they made sure this reign would last. And with quite possibly one of the greatest assembled teams in NBA history, they completely dominated the league for the span of 5 years, winning 3 championships and making 5 finals appearances. Ever since Golden State's reign, the league hasn't quite seen a true super team that completely controls the league for years on end like the Warriors did just a decade ago. We had the 2019 Raptors, but after one short season they got dismantled. We had the 2020 Lakers, but they failed to reach this point ever since, with the LeBron and AD duo making it only as far as the conference finals. We had the 2021 Bucks, but they once again failed to reach this destination, dealing with disappointing injuries in the playoffs. We had the 2022 Warriors, but this team was vastly different from the teams of the 2010s, completely retooling their team around younger players, and they haven't made it this far ever since. In 2023 we had the Nuggets, but they fell into the same pit the previous 4 teams did, failing to repeat as champions. And in 2024, it will be the 6th year in a row that we have a different NBA champion. And while I actually believe this is a good thing for the league, maintaining a balance of power, why hasn't any team in recent years replicated the success of the 2010s Warriors? Creating a dynasty in the modern NBA that wins multiple championships has become almost impossible. Salary cap structures, player mobility, contract structures, and free agency dynamics in recent years have all made creating a modern version of the Splash Brother Warriors nearly impossible, and you can blame it all on the NBA's CBA, or Collective Bargaining Agreement. This collective bargaining agreement is a formal contract between the National Basketball Association and the National Basketball Players Association that goes over certain rules and guidelines regarding the players and teams' relations. The CBA over history has made it harder and harder to form and maintain juggernauts of teams. Near the turn of the century marked the time when the CBA really started to crack down on super teams. In the 1999 CBA, we were introduced to maximum salary limits, which allowed teams to sign multiple players without exceeding the salary cap. This change marks one of the easiest times to make a super team. Between the 1999 CBA and the next version of the CBA, which came out in 2005, we saw the emergence of the Kobe and Shaq Lakers and the Tim Duncan Spurs, who won 6 of the 7 NBA championships in this time frame. The 2005 CBA was really the start of the erase of super teams. In this CBA, the major addition was the reduction of maximum length contracts to 5 years for free agents re-signing with their current team, and 6 years of those signing with a new team. These changes aimed to increase player movement and prevent teams from stacking talent for long periods of time. But this was only the beginning of these changes. In the 2011 CBA, we saw a lot to combat super teams. First off, the luxury tax became significantly stricter and more punishing. This made it so much harder for teams to assemble rosters full of star players, and keeping these rosters for consecutive years was almost impossible. The NBA in 2011 imposed restrictions on sign and trade deals, which were a very popular way to get star players onto great teams. The 2011 CBA was crucial in limiting super teams. The next CBA was 6 years later in 2017. The NBA introduced the Supermax contract this year, which allowed teams to offer significantly higher salaries to their own star players, up to 35% of their team's salary cap. This change was aimed to keep star players on their own teams and make it more challenging for stars to join loaded teams together. The NBA in 2017 continued to further increase the luxury tax penalties, which made it even harder to keep a super team. And in the most recent CBA from the NBA that came out just 1 year ago in 2023, there were many similar changes implemented. Once again, we saw more changes that made going above the luxury tax that much more punishing, like some of the changes listed right here. Veteran extensions could now be worth up to 140% of the player's previous salary, which helped players on their same team and prevent those teams from getting more stars with less cap space to work with. Finally, we saw the addition of control aspects added to salary cap. So let me ask you, how have these changes from the CBA actually affected super teams in real time? Well, let's talk about it. Let's start this all the way back from the beginning of NBA history. The very first super team of NBA history was actually the Bill Russell Celtics, who won 11 championships in a 13-year span. Back in the 50s and 60s, there was no free agency, and players had very limited rights to negotiate their contracts. Teams could literally keep players for their whole career if they wanted to, which was pretty common back in the day. So the Celtics were able to pretty much keep a defensive juggernaut super team for a decade plus straight. Then it wasn't until 1976 where Oscar Robertson sued the NBA, which led to the creation of free agency. The next major super team we saw was the Showtime Lakers from the 80s, who kept an offensive powerhouse of a roster for pretty much a whole decade. Without strict salary cap rules of the modern NBA and a very weak free agency in the 80s, the Lakers were able to keep multiple superstars like Magic Johnson, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, James Worthy, and have great depth around those players with guys like Byron Scott, AC Green, Jamal Wilkes, and Michael Cooper for a whole decade without any major problems. And the Bird Rule was created in the 80s, named after Larry Bird himself, allowed teams to exceed the salary cap to re-sign their own stars, and this helped teams like the Lakers and Celtics keep their dominant teams together. The next big super team of the NBA was the 90s Bulls, who were honestly ripping off Michael Jordan throughout most of his career and absolutely robbing Scottie Pippen of what he deserved. The Spurs from 1999 to 2014 are in a very similar boat as the Bulls. Their star player and Tim Duncan took pay cuts to help the Spurs continue their winning dynasty near the end, like Duncan's 3-year, $30 million contract in 2012, which was a huge step down from his previous 2-year, $40 million deal. They also drafted under-the-radar players that cared about winning just as much as Tim, like Tony Parker and Manu Ginobili. They also had Kawhi Leonard in his early years where he was drastically underpaid. The 2010s Heat were able to form a big three with LeBron, D. Wade, and Bosh in 2010, right before the 2011 CBA came out, which put huge restrictions on contracts and luxury taxes. And finally, the Golden State Warriors were mainly able to attain their team through the draft, which is always going to be the cheaper route. And they got the luckiest break in securing KD in the summer of 2016. Right here, we have a chart that shows the NBA salary cap growth from 2001 to 2024. It's pretty normal and healthy for a salary cap to slightly grow year by year. But do you guys notice anything fishy here? The salary cap growth from 2015 to 2016 was suspiciously high. Do you know what else happened during 2016? Yeah, that's right. The Warriors got KD in free agency. Because the salary cap from 2015 to 2016 increased nearly by 35%, the Warriors were able to have enough cap space to sign an expensive superstar like KD without really losing much of their existing team. So what really changes from then to now? The ultra success of the Warriors really put the league on notice and made sure something like this would never happen again. We've seen dozens of super teams emerge and fail in almost the exact same way. They're able to land extremely talented superstars in free agency, but lack the depth and synergy to truly contend. Every championship team needs their role players. The Heat with LeBron from 2010 to 2014 are a great example of this. In 2011, they lost in a pathetic series against the Mavericks. They clearly had the talent to win a championship, but they were still missing a few key pieces. So they went out and got players like Ray Allen, Shane Battier, and Chris Anderson, and then they won 2 championships after that. However, due to the heavy luxury tax increases in the 2011 CBA, the Heat had to split up the Big Three in 2014. Let's compare the situation to another Big Three we're familiar with, the Brooklyn Nets from about 2020 to 2022. They had unbelievable talent with Harden, Kyrie, and Durant. This team had no great role players around the Big Three, with lackluster guys like Joe Harris, an old-washed Blake Griffin, Nick Claxton, and Landry Shamet. These players aren't going to win you a championship. And because they spent so much money to get Harden, Kyrie, and Kevin Durant, they had no more space to get anyone else. They simply couldn't. Whereas other teams in the past, like the Heat we just talked about, they were able to get key role players like Shane Battier and Ray Allen while still keeping their Big Three due to less strict contract and salary cap rules. But LeBron has been on both ends of this. The Lakers, ever since LeBron and Anthony Davis joined, are another huge example of a super talented group of stars on a team who failed to keep a championship level supporting cast around them. In 2020, the Lakers were by far the most formidable team in the league. Not only did they have their LeBron and Anthony Davis duo, but they had a spectacular supporting cast. They had quality vets like Dwight Howard, Danny Green, and JaVale McGee. And they also had the combination of young and impactful players like Alex Caruso, Kyle Kuzma, and KCP. This team was stacked, but they couldn't afford to keep this roster. Alex Caruso was an emerging star role player, and they lost him to the Bulls. They lost another upcoming star in Kuzma to the Warriors. They lost KCP, a quality 3-and-D player, to the Wizards. And their vets were quickly losing their edge in a hyper-competitive league. So the Lakers then tried to replace this core with new guys like Austin Reeves, D'Angelo Russell, Rui Hachimura, and Taurean Prince. But this wasn't enough in a cutthroat Western Conference. The Milwaukee Bucks in 2021 had a near-perfect fit to win a championship, with one of the best players in the league, offensive killers, multiple defensive stoppers, and scrappy and physical role players. Besides the injuries they've dealt with in the playoffs, the only thing the Bucks have done to really try to level up this team is signing Damian Lillard, which killed the defensive aura this team had. The Bucks, due to being a small market team, don't have the capabilities of signing high-profile names. They're forced to play with the cards they're dealt. The Warriors in 2022, similar to the 2020 Lakers, had a perfect blend of veterans like Klay Thompson, Draymond Green, and Andre Iguodala around young players like Jordan Poole, Andrew Wiggins, and Kevon Looney, all centered around their star Steph Curry. But once again, a story as old as time. The Warriors eventually had to make some tough decisions based on contract rules and luxury taxes, so they had to cut ties with one of their best offensive players, Jordan Poole. Besides this, the Warriors' veteran presence had quickly spoiled into an old team who couldn't keep up with a younger, competitive Western Conference. The 2024 Suns are a perfect example of how creating a super team doesn't work anymore. They first traded away their valuable role players like Cam Johnson, Jay Crowder, and Mikal Bridges, along with 4 first-round picks to get Kevin Durant. Then, if their depth wasn't bad enough, they made it even worse by trading away Chris Paul and Landry Shamet for Bradley Beal. Because they spent so much money to acquire and maintain their Big Three, combined with the sheer luxury tax the Suns were taking on, the supporting cast they could put around them was so underwhelming. Having players like Yusuf Nurkic, Eric Gordon, Grayson Allen, and Royce O'Neal was never going to cut it. So now the Suns are quite possibly the most screwed team in the league with no other options. They went in win now mode, but couldn't even get a single playoff win. Pretty sad. And the last team that deserves a mention is the Denver Nuggets. And they may not come off as a super team to you, But after getting that 2023 championship, they had to do one of two things. Either A, give Michael Porter Jr. a Supermax contract, or lose him in free agency. They chose the first option, and they lost key role players like Bruce Brown and Jeff Green, both who were key in winning that ring. The Nuggets in 2024 were so deprived of quality role players. Their highest playing bench player in terms of minutes for Denver was Christian Brown, who played about 17 minutes a night. The lack of depth quietly tore the Nuggets apart. With older contract rules, looser free agency guidelines, and less strict luxury tax rules, the Nuggets and all of these other teams I mentioned recently, like the Suns, Warriors, Bucks, Lakers, and Nets, would be able to maintain their star players, maintain their key role players, and go and get championship-level supporting cast pieces to complete their teams like teams of previous decades were able to do. The league has become more balanced than ever in recent years, making it almost impossible to maintain a championship-level team for more than a few years without inevitably crumbling. It's only a matter of time before modern super teams of today eventually suffer the financial burdens that the previous ones have suffered before them. So this is why I think the Splash Brother Warriors were truly the last successful super team, and that the era of super teams might already be at its end.